Tonight we sail toward the edge of the known world, where gray water heaves beneath a cold sky, and the long white cliffs of Britain rise like the walls of some forbidden kingdom. It is the late summer of 55 BC, and across the narrow sea, on the coast of Gaul, a Roman commander stands at the height of his power. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar. He is not yet the murdered dictator of legend, not yet the marble face in Senate halls, not yet the ghost haunting the dreams of emperors. He is a general, a gambler, a writer of his own greatness, and a man who understands that history belongs not merely to those who win battles, but to those who describe them. For years, Caesar has been carving his way through Gaul with sword, diplomacy, terror, and calculation. Tribe after tribe has bent beneath the pressure of Roman arms. Fortified towns have fallen. Hostages have been taken. Grain has been seized. Alliances have been made and broken beneath the bronze gaze of the eagle standards. And yet, across the water, there remains an island that Roman merchants whisper about, an island of tin, dogs, cattle, pearls, chariots, forests, priests, warriors, and strange rites beneath ancient trees. Britain. To the Romans, Britain is not merely a place. It is a symbol. It is the far horizon. It is the last smudge of land at the end of maps and imagination. It is spoken of by traders who have crossed the sea in creaking ships, by Gaulish prisoners who claim their allies dwell there, by soldiers who have heard that the islanders paint their bodies and race into battle with cries that seem more animal than human. Much of this is rumor. Much is exaggeration. Much is the familiar arrogance of empire looking outward and calling the unknown barbaric. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Caesar has reasons, many reasons, for looking across the channel. Some are military, some are political, some are personal. He believes, or at least writes, that the Britons have aided his enemies in Gaul. He wants to frighten those enemies by showing that no refuge is beyond Roman reach. He wants intelligence, tribute, glory. He wants the Senate and the people of Rome to hear that he has crossed into a world no Roman army has ever truly possessed. This is not conquest in its full form. Not yet. This is reconnaissance dressed in thunder, a probing spear thrust into the mist. The evidence for that first Roman encounter comes not from legend alone, but from Caesar's own account, from later Roman historians, from shoreline archaeology, from stratigraphic excavation at possible landing sites, from the study of ancient topography, from coins and fortifications and the slow work of scholars trying to match ancient words with earth and stone. At places along the coast of Kent, archaeologists have searched for the material shadow of that expedition. They have examined ditches, weapons, pottery, beach formations, tidal patterns, and the changing shape of harbors buried beneath 2,000 years of silt and settlement. Radiocarbon dating can narrow the age of organic traces. Lithic analysis can illuminate older worlds beneath the Roman horizon. Environmental study can reveal ancient coastlines no longer visible to the human eye. And yet, Caesar's first landing still carries uncertainty, as if the sea itself has refused to surrender the whole truth. The Roman world was written in ink, but Britain kept many of its memories in soil. Picture the fleet, not the polished fantasy of empire, but the difficult reality. Transport ships heavy with men and horses, war galleys low in the water, sailors fighting the wind, commanders shouting over the slap of waves, legionaries, trained for roads and camps and ordered battle, now waiting in cramped vessels, staring at a coastline unlike any they had known. Their armor smells of oil and sweat. Their shields are stacked, their helmets bright, their sandals wet with spray. The sea is not their natural battlefield. It lifts them, drops them, mocks their discipline. On the shore, the Britons gather. They are not the ignorant figures Roman imagination would later make of them. They know their land. They know the tides, the beaches, the slopes above the water, the terror that can be made from noise and speed. Chariots move along the coast, wheels cutting through wet sand and grass. Horses toss their heads. Warriors display themselves as living weapons. Their presence is deliberate, theatrical, intelligent. They understand what it means to make an invader hesitate. Rome has crossed many rivers. Rome has besieged many towns. But here, the empire in embryo must step from ship to surf under the eyes of men who have no intention of making the landing easy. Caesar's account tells of soldiers reluctant to leap into deep water while burdened with armor. The ships cannot come close enough. The enemy waits. The moment trembles. Then, according to the story, the standard-bearer of the 10th Legion calls upon the gods and plunges forward with the eagle, shaming his comrades into action. Whether it happened exactly so, no one can say. Roman commanders knew the value of a scene. They knew that courage, written well, could become eternal. But beneath the literature, something real occurred. Men jumped. Shields splashed. Spears flew. The surf turned violent. The beach became a place between worlds, neither sea nor land, neither Roman nor British, a threshold where the fate of centuries announced itself in salt water and blood. The Romans forced a landing. The Britons withdrew. Agreements were made. Hostages were promised. Then storms struck the Roman ships, damaging the fleet and exposing how fragile this bold adventure truly was. The Channel, that narrow strip of water, proved wider than ambition. Caesar had entered Britain, but he had not mastered it. He had shown the island that Rome existed. He had shown Rome that Britain could be reached. Yet he had also learned that distance, weather, tides, and local resistance could humble even the most disciplined army on earth. This is how Rome first touched Britain, not with the serene confidence of destiny, but with uncertainty, improvisation, and danger. To imagine that moment is to stand at the beginning of a long and uneasy relationship, one world reaching for another, one empire testing the edge of its power, one island watching from its cliffs, answerless, adrift to ponder what kind of storm had appeared upon the sea. Gods and mortals once walked the earth, or so the ancient mind believed. Omens mattered, birds mattered, dreams mattered. The whiteness of cliffs, the cries of gulls, the sudden violence of weather, all could be read as messages from powers greater than men. To Caesar, Britain was a stage upon which he could enlarge his name. To the soldiers, it may have seemed a cold and haunted shore. To the islanders, the Romans were not destiny. They were strangers in metal, temporary figures emerging from ships, vulnerable to mud, tide, hunger, and fear. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath the fields of Kent, beneath the harbors lost to silt, beneath the quiet towns where ancient violence sleeps below gardens and roads. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, post your location and your local time. Somewhere in the darkness, across oceans and continents, others are listening too, gathered around the same ancient fire. Britain before Rome was not an empty island waiting for civilization to arrive. It was a living world of smoke, cattle, iron, rain, memory, and sacred ground, shaped by countless generations who understood the land in ways no foreign conqueror could immediately grasp. Across the south and east, fields stretched beneath shifting skies, divided by hedges, ditches, banks, and paths worn deep by hooves and feet. The people who lived there farmed wheat, barley, beans, and oats. They kept cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses. They stored grain in pits below the earth and raised roundhouses of timber, wattle, clay, and thatch. Their walls curved against the wind, their hearths glowing at the center like small suns against the damp. This was an Iron Age society, but the phrase is too cold for the warmth of its human life. It does not show the smell of wood smoke rising through roof openings, the sound of querns grinding grain before dawn, the creak of leather harness, the clang of a smith's hammer on heated metal, the voices of children moving between animals and doorways. It does not show the old stories told in the half-light, or the fear and reverence that gathered around rivers, groves, springs, and hilltops. Archaeology has slowly restored some of that vanished world. Stratigraphic excavation has revealed post holes where houses once stood, enclosure ditches where communities marked land and belonging, and burials where bodies were placed with care, violence, or mystery. Radiocarbon dating has helped establish the age of settlements, field systems, and ritual deposits. Pollen analysis has traced the clearing of woodland and the spread of agriculture. Metallurgical study has shown how iron tools, weapons, ornaments, and fittings were made, used, repaired, and finally abandoned to the soil. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Many Britons left no written records of their own. Their voices reach us through objects, through landscapes, through bones, through the often hostile words of outsiders. The Romans and Greeks described them as warlike, strange, brave, unruly, noble, savage, and remote. Such descriptions reveal as much about Mediterranean prejudice as they do about Britain itself. To call these islanders primitive is to misunderstand them. They were not failed Romans. They were something else entirely. Their political world was complex. Britain was not a single kingdom, nor a united nation in any modern sense. It was a mosaic of peoples, alliances, rivalries, bloodlines, and territories. Some groups built powerful hill forts on high ridges, with great ramparts of earth and timber commanding the valleys below. Others lived in more open settlements, clustered around farms, trackways, markets, and ritual places. Wealth could be displayed in horses, feasting equipment, imported goods, fine metalwork, and control of fertile land. The hill forts themselves were more than military refuges. Some were gathering places, statements of authority, symbols cut into the body of the landscape. From their ramparts, a person could see rivers shining in the distance, woods darkening the slopes, smoke rising from scattered homes, and tracks leading away toward other communities. They were centers of storage, ceremony, defense, and identity. Their great banks did not merely keep enemies out. They told the world that a people belonged here. Trade connected Britain to wider horizons. The island was distant, but not isolated. Across the channel moved metal, wine, pottery, salt, slaves, ideas, and prestige goods. Coins circulated in parts of southern Britain, not always as simple money, but as markers of power and influence. Some carried abstract designs derived from earlier Mediterranean models, transformed into swirling shapes, horses, symbols, and forms that feel almost dreamlike to modern eyes. These coins speak of contact, imitation, adaptation, and pride. The people of Britain mastered iron, but they also loved beauty. Archaeological finds reveal decorated mirrors, brooches, torques, shields, sword fittings, and vessels alive with curving lines and hidden motion. Their art rarely pursued the straight discipline of Roman architecture. It flowed, turned, doubled back, and shimmered. A face might become a pattern. An animal might dissolve into spirals. Meaning seems to move just beyond reach, answerless, adrift to ponder. Religion shaped this world deeply, though its full inner life can never be recovered. Sacred places were not confined to temples built in stone. Power lived in water, trees, earth, sky, and boundary. Offerings were placed in rivers and bogs. Weapons were bent, broken, and given away. Human remains found in wetlands have raised difficult questions about sacrifice, execution, punishment, and ritual killing. Some bodies were preserved by peat in unsettling detail, with hair, skin, and expression drawn across centuries. The Druids occupy a powerful place in the imagination, yet they remain shadowy. Classical writers describe them as priests, judges, teachers, philosophers, and guardians of sacred knowledge. They were said to preserve memory through oral tradition rather than writing. Whether every detail is trustworthy is impossible to know. But the idea of learned religious specialists within Iron Age society is not difficult to accept. Complex communities require mediators between families, between chiefs, between the living and the dead, between human law and the unseen order of things. Death itself was treated in varied ways. Some bodies were buried crouched in graves, others were placed in pits, ditches, or unusual positions. Some communities used excarnation, allowing the body to decay above ground before selected bones were deposited elsewhere. At times, skulls received particular attention. Such practices may seem strange to modern eyes, but they belonged to a world where ancestors, enemies, fertility, memory, and the sacred could not be neatly separated. Genomic data has added new depth to the story, revealing patterns of ancestry, movement, and connection that complicate older assumptions. Britain was never a sealed container. People had moved into, out of, and across the island for millennia. The Iron Age population carried deep roots and outside links alike. Their identities were not simple labels. They were made through kinship, place, language, exchange, warfare, marriage, and myth. And over all of this lay the weather, the rain on thatch, the mist in valleys, the mud beneath carts, the salt wind on coastal farms, the long winter darkness, the brief blaze of summer. Environment was not background. It was destiny's quiet partner. Harvest failure could weaken a leader. Disease among cattle could ruin households. Flooded paths could delay gatherings. Good pasture could make a family rich. This was the island Rome looked upon from across the sea, not a wilderness, but a crowded sacred landscape, alive with its own laws, fears, technologies, ambitions, and gods. A land of hill forts and hidden offerings, of farmers and warriors, of mothers grinding grain while chiefs weighed alliances, of smiths drawing tools from fire while priests watched the flight of birds. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath those old fields. where the island still keeps the memory of its first peoples under the patient skin of the earth. In the year A.D. 43, the empire came not as a rumor, not as a brief wound upon the coast, but as a machine of conquest, organized, deliberate, and hungry for permanence. Across the Channel, beneath the authority of Emperor Claudius, ships gathered in numbers great enough to darken the imagination. Claudius was new to power, and in Rome, power was never merely inherited. It had to be displayed. It had to be justified in marble, coinage, ceremony, and blood. He had survived palace intrigue, ridicule, suspicion, and the murderous politics of the imperial household. Now he needed victory, not a quiet frontier adjustment, not some minor diplomatic success in a distant province. He needed a triumph worthy of public memory. Britain offered him exactly that. To conquer the island at the edge of the ocean was to claim what even earlier ambition had failed to hold. It was a prize of geography and theater, a place wrapped in mist and exaggeration, close enough to reach, distant enough to seem mythical. The invasion could be sold to Rome as destiny. It could be presented as the taming of the unknown, the extension of order over the wild margins of the world. And so the legions prepared. The invasion force was vast by the standards of the Western Ocean. Legions, auxiliary cavalry, engineers, surveyors, armorers, scribes, interpreters, medical attendants, muleteers, merchants, and camp followers formed a moving society of war. Rome did not simply send soldiers. Rome sent roads waiting to be built, forts waiting to be measured, taxes waiting to be counted, and governors waiting to rule. Every helmet, every tent peg, every writing tablet, every iron tool carried the quiet assumption that this time the empire had not come to visit. It had come to stay. Imagine the embarkation, the creak of timber hulls, the shouting of officers, the snorting of horses resisting the gangplanks, the smell of pitch, salt, leather, and fear. Men from Italy, Gaul, Spain, the Balkans, and the German frontiers stood shoulder to shoulder, bound not by one homeland, but by oath, pay, discipline, and the terrible brilliance of Roman organization. Some had fought in forests, some had guarded rivers, some had never seen Britain except as a line in a commander's briefing. A land of marshes, tribes, cattle, and chiefs. For the soldiers, this was not legend. It was damp wool, seasickness, sharpened blades, and the knowledge that somewhere beyond the water, men were waiting to kill them. The ancient sources name Aulus Plautius as the commander of the invasion. His task was not simply to win a battle, but to break resistance enough for imperial authority to take root. The Britons were not passive. They gathered under leaders whose names survive through the Roman record. Among them, Caradocus and Togodumnus, figures of defiance at the moment when the island's political world faced a force unlike any it had known. The landing itself was only the beginning. Britain's defenses did not consist of one wall, one king, one capital, or one army waiting conveniently for destruction. Its strength lay in terrain, local knowledge, shifting alliances, and the ability of warriors to withdraw, regroup, and strike where Roman formations were less comfortable. Woods, rivers, marshes, and narrow trackways could disrupt the confidence of men trained for open battle and engineered advance. Yet Rome possessed a dark patience. The legions could build a fortified camp at the end of a march as naturally as other men might build a cooking fire. They could throw up ditches, raise ramparts, set gates, organize streets, and sleep inside geometry. Their camps were not temporary shelters in spirit. They were Rome made portable. Wherever the army halted, order appeared in the mud. The campaign pushed toward the southeast, where certain British rulers had already entered relationships with Rome. Some sought protection against rivals. Some saw opportunity in submission. Some may have believed that alliance with the invader would preserve their own authority. Conquest rarely moves only by violence. It also advances through calculation, fear, gifts, hostages, titles, marriages, debts, and promises spoken in rooms where no battle is visible. Among the decisive moments came the crossing of a great river, often identified with the Medway. There, British resistance met Roman discipline in a hard struggle. The waters, the banks, the confusion of movement, the press of bodies, the shouted orders, and the flashing of weapons turned the landscape into an ordeal. Auxiliary troops skilled in swimming may have crossed in unexpected ways. Cavalry and infantry fought through uncertainty. The Britons resisted fiercely, but the Roman military system could absorb shock and continue. That was one of its most frightening qualities. A single act of courage could not easily defeat it. A sudden charge could wound it, but not always break it. Roman armies were trained to turn chaos back into procedure. Officers restored formation. Engineers repaired damage. Supply lines were adjusted. Scouts returned with reports. Punishments were delivered. Rewards were promised. The machine learned as it moved. Then Claudius himself came to Britain. His arrival was brief, ceremonial, and politically brilliant. The emperor did not need to endure every mile of mud and danger. He needed to appear at the moment when victory could be claimed. Ancient accounts describe the presence of war elephants, those great living symbols of exotic power, brought to magnify the spectacle of imperial dominance. Whether seen by many Britons or mainly remembered through Roman performance, their meaning was unmistakable. Claudius had crossed the sea. Claudius had conquered the edge of the earth. Claudius could return to Rome not as the uncertain ruler mocked by rivals, but as the subduer of Britain. In time, the settlement that would become Camulodunum was chosen as a central symbol of Roman authority. It was no accident. To establish power in a place already significant to local rulers was to write empire over native prestige. A colony of veterans, a temple to the imperial cult, administrative structures, and the visible habits of Rome would transform the landscape. Stone, tile, Latin inscriptions, straight streets, and official ritual began to speak in the language of occupation. But beneath the ceremonies, resentment gathered. Land was taken. Tribute was demanded. Hostages were held. Old hierarchies were disturbed. Some elites adapted and profited. Others lost everything. Farmers saw new obligations. Warriors faced disarmament or recruitment. Sacred places came under new pressures. The imperial cult asked conquered people to honor the power that had mastered them. To Rome, this was order. To many Britons, it must have felt like humiliation dressed in law. Still, the conquest wasn't complete. Far from it. The first victory opened a deeper struggle. Rome had landed, fought, negotiated, and planted its standards. But the island was larger than imperial ceremony. Beyond the newly claimed territories lay hills, forests, tribes, and leaders who had not accepted the logic of surrender. The year AD 43 did not mark the simple birth of Roman Britain. It marked the beginning of a long possession, contested at every level, in battlefields and council chambers, in market towns and farmsteads, in the minds of those who wondered whether survival required resistance, compromise, or silence. In the damp fields where the first invasion forces marched inland, the earth still keeps its layered testimony. Stratigraphic excavation continues to separate one occupation from another. Pottery fragments, military fittings, coins, burned horizons, and fort ditches speak where voices have vanished. Radiocarbon dating and landscape archaeology refine the picture, but never finish it. The past reveals itself like a shoreline in mist, one shape at a time. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath roads, orchards, churchyards, and quiet suburbs, where the thunder of Claudius still sleeps beneath the rain. The Roman conquest of Britain did not move like a single blade. It moved like a network of veins, spreading through valleys, across rivers, over ridges, and into forests, carrying soldiers, surveyors, commands, taxes, rumors, and fear. At the heart of this advance was the road. A Roman road was never only a road. It was a declaration. It told the landscape that distance had been measured, that mud had been challenged, that movement now belonged to the state. Before the legions came, Britain already possessed trackways, drove roads, river crossings, and ancient paths worn by animals, traders, pilgrims, and warriors. Rome did not invent movement across the island, but Rome hardened it, straightened it, drained it, guarded it, and turned it into imperial geometry. Through woodland and open country, surveyors marked lines with cold precision, engineers cut through soil, soldiers dug ditches, laid foundations, packed gravel, raised the surface, and shaped the camber so rainwater would run away into side channels. The work was exhausting, repetitive, and essential. Men who could kill in formation could also build with astonishing discipline. Their tools bit into the earth, and behind them came a new kind of Britain, one where official speed mattered. A message could travel more quickly. A governor could respond to unrest. A supply convoy could reach a fort. A tax demand could be enforced. A rebel chief could discover that the empire was not merely a distant army, but a system arriving on foot, wheel, and hoof. The roads connected forts, camps, ports, settlements, and administrative centers. They linked the southeast to the interior, the coast to the uplands, the legionary bases to the uncertain frontier. Some lines would become famous in later memory, long after their original builders had vanished into dust. But in their first life, they were not romantic relics. They were instruments of control. Along these roads, the legions advanced. The Roman army did not wander blindly. It studied the country. Scouts moved ahead. Local informants were questioned. Allied rulers were courted. Hostile territories were mapped by experience, sometimes at terrible cost. Rivers required bridges, boats, fords, or violent crossings under attack. Forests concealed ambush. Hill forts demanded caution. Marshes could swallow carts and morale alike. Every mile inland widened the problem of supply. Britain's geography resisted simplification. The south and east offered richer farming lands and stronger links to the Channel world. The west held mountains, valleys, mineral wealth, and peoples less easily folded into Roman arrangements. The north stretched into harsher landscapes where rain, distance, and resistance would test imperial patience. Rome's commanders understood that conquest was not won by one spectacular victory. It required garrisons. It required roads. It required the defeat or recruitment of local power. And so the forts appeared. At first, many were built of earth and timber, practical and fast. A rectangle pressed into the soil, a ditch, a rampart, a gate, corner towers, internal streets, barracks, workshops, granaries, command buildings. The fort was a military habit made visible. Even at the edge of the world, the Roman soldier slept inside a plan. To stand inside such a fort would have been to hear a carefully managed world. Armor being cleaned, horses stamping, cooks preparing grain, officers dictating reports, smiths repairing fittings, guards calling the watches, dice rattling in off-duty corners. Somewhere beyond the rampart, Britain remained wet, wooded, and watchful. Inside, Rome tried to make itself repeatable, fort by fort. The province was tightened. But conquest was not only a matter of imposing force upon enemies, it also required choosing friends. Some British elites saw advantage in cooperation. The empire could confirm their status, provide luxury goods, protect them from rivals, and give them access to new forms of wealth. A chief who entered the Roman orbit might receive recognition, trade opportunities, and security. His sons might learn Roman customs. His household might acquire imported pottery, wine, metalwork, and coin. What looked like surrender from one angle could look like strategy from another. Others resisted because resistance preserved honor, land, independence, or sacred obligation. For them, the road was a scar. The fort was an insult. The tax collector was a thief with official language. The Roman demand for hostages was not diplomacy, but a knife held against the future. Rome knew both methods well. It could flatter and punish in the same season. A cooperative ruler might be praised as a friend and ally. A defiant stronghold might be stormed, its people killed, enslaved, displaced, or disarmed. The empire preferred obedience, but it did not require affection. Peace was acceptable, even when it was made of exhaustion. Archaeology reveals this process not as a clean map of colored territory, but as layers of disturbance and adaptation. Fort ditches cut through older landscapes. Burned deposits may mark destruction, accident, or deliberate clearance. Military equipment appears where marching columns passed or garrisons settled. Imported ceramics enter local communities. Native forms continue beside Roman ones. Coins appear in some places and remain rare in others. The spread of empire was uneven, textured, and deeply human. Stratigraphic excavation can show how a military site began as a temporary camp, then became a more permanent fort, then perhaps a town, a supply base, or a memory beneath later buildings. Radiocarbon dating can help place organic remains in time, while environmental analysis reveals what soldiers and civilians ate, what animals they kept, what crops filled their granaries, and how surrounding land was cleared or managed. The conquest did not merely change politics, it changed soils, woods, diets, water systems, and patterns of labor. The Roman army needed food in vast quantities: grain, meat, fodder, leather, timber, iron, and transport animals had to be secured. Local communities felt that hunger. Some supplied willingly through treaty or profit. Others supplied because soldiers stood nearby. The empire did not live on glory. It lived on logistics. Roads made those logistics possible. They also carried culture. Along them came traders, potters, builders, officials, priests, prostitutes, craftsmen, interpreters, and families. Latin words entered new places. Roman measurements shaped land. New markets grew near forts because soldiers had pay and needs. Local people came to sell, negotiate, observe, resent, imitate, and survive. Around some garrisons, civilian settlements formed, messy and alive, with taverns, workshops, shrines, bathhouses, and homes that did not fit neatly into any military plan. Yet the forest remained. In the imagination of Rome, the forest was often a place of danger, concealment, and barbarism. In Britain, woodland could shelter resistance, preserve older ritual landscapes, and disrupt the straight confidence of roads, the cutting of timber for forts, fuel, bridges, and buildings was itself a conquest of the environment. Axes rang through trees that may have stood for centuries. Smoke rose from charcoal burning. Open corridors appeared where shadows had been. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know every village that negotiated with Roman officers. We do not know every farm that watched a marching column pass. We do not know every child who saw the flash of helmets through rain, or every old storyteller who understood that the island had entered a new and dangerous age. The surviving record favors generals, governors, inscriptions, forts, and coins. But conquest was lived most intensely by those whose names were never carved in stone. A woman in a roundhouse, hearing that a road would cross grazing land. A smith asked to repair equipment for men he feared. A young warrior deciding whether to join an auxiliary unit or vanish into the hills. A local leader weighing pride against the survival of his people. A slave taken in war, walking behind soldiers along a road still wet from construction. This is how empire truly advances. Not only beneath banners, but through decisions made in doorways, fields, markets, and councils. Not only in battles, but in compromises that taste of ash. The roads continued to lengthen. The forts continued to multiply. Roman power pressed westward, northward, inward, turning geography into administration. But every mile built also announced the scale of what had to be held. Every fort required men. Every garrison required supplies. Every alliance required management. Every humiliation stored the possibility of fire. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath the old road lines, where gravel, ditch, and shadow still remember the footsteps of soldiers who believed the world could be ordered by measurement and will. A fire line runs through the archaeology of Roman Britain. It lies beneath modern streets, beneath glass offices, beneath pavements, railway cuttings, cellars, shops, and churchyards. It is a dark seam of destruction, a layer of ash and reddened clay where timber burned so fiercely that the earth itself remembers. In some places, excavators have found it like a scar in the soil, a witness to one of the most terrifying revolts Rome ever faced. At the heart of that fire stands Boudica. She was queen of the Iceni, a people of eastern Britain whose lands stretched across the flat skies, wetlands, river valleys, and fertile fields of what is now Norfolk and its neighboring regions. Her name survives through Roman writers, carried across centuries by men who wrote from the side of empire, and yet even through their hostile and fascinated words, something immense can still be felt. She appears not as a whisper, but as a storm. Her husband, Prasutagus, had ruled as a client king under Roman authority. Such arrangements were tools of empire. Rome allowed certain native rulers to keep position, at least for a time, so long as loyalty, tribute, and political usefulness continued. A client king could preserve local dignity while serving imperial strategy. It was a bargain made under pressure, dressed in diplomacy, guarded by the possibility of force. When Prasutagus died, he attempted to secure his household by leaving his kingdom jointly to his daughters and to the emperor. It was a desperate compromise, perhaps intended to protect his family from confiscation. But Rome did not always honor the delicate expectations of subject rulers. To imperial officials, allied territory could become provincial property. Debts could be demanded. Estates could be seized. The language of law could become a weapon sharper than iron. Then came the humiliation that transformed grievance into catastrophe. Roman accounts state that Boudica was flogged and that her daughters were assaulted. These acts, whether recorded with exact detail or shaped by literary purpose, represented more than private cruelty. They symbolized the stripping of royal protection, the violation of lineage, and the announcement that no sacred boundary remained. A queen had been treated as spoil. Her children had been made instruments of terror. Honor, kinship, law, and divine order had been spat upon. In the world of Iron Age Britain, such a violation could not simply vanish into silence. Boudica rose. The rebellion did not emerge from one wound alone. It drew strength from many resentments: land seizures, heavy taxation, Roman loans called in with severity. Veteran colonists settled on confiscated ground, local elites insulted or displaced, sacred traditions pressured by foreign power. The imperial cult demanding reverence for the very system that had broken families and taken fields. Across eastern Britain, anger gathered like heat beneath dry timber. The first great target was Camulodunum. This settlement, made a colony for Roman veterans, stood as one of the most arrogant symbols of occupation. Veterans had received land, and local people may have experienced them not as honorable retirees, but as armed settlers backed by imperial authority. A temple to the deified emperor rose there, a monument of political religion that required the conquered to participate in the glorification of conquest. To those who suffered under Rome, its columns may have looked less like piety than domination in stone. When the rebels came, the town was poorly defended. The fury was overwhelming. Buildings burned. Inhabitants were killed. The temple became a refuge and then a tomb. The violence was not random in meaning. It was directed against symbols of Roman presence, Roman privilege, and Roman contempt. The archaeology of destruction, where found, gives the event a physical weight that words alone cannot hold. Charred remains, collapsed walls, burned daub, broken objects, and abrupt abandonment speak of panic, heat, and the end of ordinary life. The governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was far away in the west, campaigning against sacred centers and resistance. Distance, which Rome usually mastered through roads and discipline, now became a vulnerability. The province was not yet settled deeply enough to absorb such a rising without terror. A rebellion could move faster than imperial confidence. The rebels turned toward Londinium. At that time, Londinium was not yet the ancient capital of later memory. It was young, commercially important, and growing near the river, where ships, warehouses, merchants, and roads joined the province to wider imperial trade. Its wealth made it valuable. Its relative weakness made it doomed. Suetonius reached the settlement but judged that he could not defend it. This decision, cold and military, abandoned the town to its fate. Those who could flee may have fled. Those who remained faced the storm. Londinium burned. Archaeologists have identified a famous destruction horizon in the city, a red and black layer associated with the revolt, where intense burning sealed the material life of the early Roman town. Here the rebellion becomes more than a story of kings and armies. It becomes human terror. A merchant hiding coins beneath a floor, a child pulled through smoke, a worker trapped near a burning building, a slave who did not know which side offered survival. a woman listening to the roar of approaching violence while the sky above the river darkened with ash. Verulamium also fell victim to the revolt's path, another settlement tied to Roman power, wealth, and collaboration was destroyed. Ancient writers give horrifying numbers for those killed in the uprising, though such figures may be exaggerated. The essential truth needs no inflation. The revolt shook Roman Britain to its foundations. It showed that the province was not subdued in spirit. Beneath the roads, treaties, and official ceremonies lay rage sharp enough to consume cities. Boudicca's army was likely vast, though not organized like a Roman legion. It may have included warriors, families, dependents, carts, and people drawn by vengeance, fear, hope, or the momentum of liberation. To imagine it as a simple military force is too narrow. It was a people in motion, carrying grief as fuel. The sound of it must have been immense wheels, animals, shouting, iron, drums, and the breath of thousands moving beneath a troubled sky. Yet Rome, wounded and horrified, was not finished. Suetonius chose ground carefully. He had fewer men, but he had discipline, armor, shields, training, and the grim advantage of formation. The exact battlefield remains debated, hidden somewhere in the unsettled geography of scholarship and soil. Still, the outline is clear. The Romans positioned themselves where numbers could not easily envelop them. The rebels advanced with confidence born from victory. Families may have watched from wagons, expecting the final breaking of Roman power. Then the legions became a wall. Javelins flew, shields locked, short swords worked in close. Roman discipline turned the crush of battle into slaughter. The Britons, trapped by their own mass and perhaps by wagons behind them, could not transform courage into order. The rebellion collapsed in blood. Boudicca's death followed, though accounts differ on whether she took poison, fell ill, or died in some other manner lost to time. She remains answerless, adrift to ponder. Was she a freedom fighter, a grieving mother, a queen defending sacred honor, a rebel commander, a symbol shaped by Roman fear, or all of these at once? The evidence does not allow easy possession of her soul, but it does allow awe. She forced Rome to confront the cost of contempt. She made the empire bleed. She burned into history a warning that conquest without restraint breeds fire. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath the cities she turned to ash, where the blackened soil still murmurs of humiliation, vengeance, and the terrible price of empire. In the quiet years that followed fire and punishment, Britain did not become Roman in a single breath. It changed unevenly, village by village, shrine by shrine, bathhouse by bathhouse, field by field, until the island wore empire like a garment altered by native hands. This was not simple replacement. Rome did not erase Britain and pour Italy into the empty space. The province that emerged was stranger, richer, and more complicated than any official inscription could admit. Beneath the tiled roofs and straight streets, older loyalties survived. Beneath Latin words, local memory endured. Beneath the statues of imported gods, older powers waited in springs, groves, hills, and rivers. The Roman city was one of empire's greatest instruments. It gathered administration, commerce, law, spectacle, and ritual into a visible form. In Britain, towns grew where military roads crossed, where rivers carried trade, where local elites could be drawn into the habits of provincial life. Forums appeared as public hearts of settlement. Basilicas offered spaces for business, judgment, display, and authority. Shops lined streets. Workshops smoked. Inns received travelers. Markets filled with wool, grain, pottery, meat, salt, leather, tools, gossip, and debt. Stone and tile spoke the language of permanence. To a person raised among roundhouses and timber enclosures, the Roman town must have seemed both magnificent and unsettling. Its buildings imposed angles upon the eye. Its drains carried waste away beneath the feet. Its walls separated public from private in unfamiliar ways. Its inscriptions fixed names into stone. Its official spaces suggested that power could be measured, mapped, and built. Yet these towns were never purely Roman. Many inhabitants were Britons adapting to new circumstances. Some wore Roman-style clothing in public while keeping older customs at home. Some used Latin for business and local speech among family. Some adopted Roman dining habits, imported vessels, and new forms of display. Others accepted only what was useful. A person could buy Roman pottery, honor a local god, pay tax in coin, and still think of the land through ancestral stories. This is where the mystery deepens. Material culture can tempt us into false certainty. A Roman bowl in a British house does not prove a Roman soul. A villa floor with mosaics does not mean the family forgot older gods. A Latin inscription does not reveal the language of lullabies. Archaeology offers surfaces and fragments, while the inner life of people remains partly concealed, still for the most part hidden beneath silence. Among the most powerful signs of change were the baths. The Roman bathhouse was not merely a place to wash. It was a theater of the body, a social hall, a health ritual, a political setting, and a declaration of civilized leisure. In its heated rooms, people moved through warmth, steam, oil, scraping, conversation, and display. Floors rested on small pillars so hot air could pass beneath them. Furnaces roared. Water glimmered in pools. Walls sweated with heat. The smell of oil, damp stone, smoke, and human bodies filled the air. For soldiers, baths restored discipline and morale. For townspeople, they offered sociability and status. For local elites, funding a bathhouse could announce generosity and ambition. To build such a place was to say that one belonged within the imperial world. To use it was to participate in habits that stretched from North Africa to Gaul, from Syria to Spain, from the Rhine to the far Atlantic edge. But in Britain, even the bathhouse stood beneath different skies. Rain beat on roofs. Cold winds crossed courtyards. Outside, the old island pressed close. Steam rose like mist from a sacred spring. Nowhere is the blending of worlds more vivid than at Bath, where hot mineral waters had long emerged from the earth with an almost supernatural force. To the Roman mind, such a place demanded reverence. To the native mind, it likely already possessed sanctity. Here, the goddess Sulis was joined with Minerva, creating a divine identity neither wholly local nor wholly Mediterranean. The sacred spring did not cease to be British when Roman architecture surrounded it. Instead, the stones gave new shape to older awe. People came with prayers. They asked for healing, justice, vengeance, luck, and relief. Some threw offerings into water. Some left curse tablets, thin sheets of metal inscribed with pleas against thieves and enemies. These objects are among the most intimate voices from Roman Britain. They are not grand histories. They are wounded whispers. Someone stole a cloak. Someone took coins. Someone betrayed trust. The petitioner calls upon divine power to see what human law cannot fix. Here, the empire becomes human again. Not emperors, not governors, not legions, but ordinary people anxious over property, illness, honor, and pain. A world of gods was also a world of missing gloves, unpaid debts, jealousies, market quarrels, and private grief. Religion across Roman Britain was not a single system neatly imposed from above. It was crowded, adaptive, and alive. Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Minerva, and the imperial cult stood beside local deities of rivers, hills, groves, and tribal memory. Soldiers brought gods from their homelands. Merchants carried cults along trade routes. Dedications were carved to divine powers with double names, a sign of translation between sacred worlds. At shrines and temples, people negotiated with the unseen through offerings, vows, sacrifice, and ceremony. The imperial cult held special political weight. To honor the emperor's spirit was not merely devotional, it was a public act of loyalty. For elites, participation could be prudent, even profitable. For communities, temples and ceremonies tied local life to imperial order. Yet devotion and obligation are difficult to separate. Did worshippers believe, conform, calculate, or combine all three? The answer remains answerless, adrift to ponder. The countryside changed too. Villas began to appear in some regions, especially where wealth, agricultural production, and access to markets supported elite display. A villa was not just a comfortable house, it was an economic center, a statement of status, and a bridge between rural wealth and Roman taste. Some had mosaic floors, painted walls, heated rooms, bath suites, courtyards, storage buildings, barns, and workshops. Their owners may have been Roman settlers, native aristocrats, veterans, or families whose identities had become layered across generations. In their mosaics, we see ambition turned into pattern, gods, animals, geometric forms, hunting scenes, seasons, and mythological imagery spread across floors walked by people who lived at the intersection of cultures. Yet outside the reception rooms, labor continued. Tenants, slaves, servants, craftsmen, and farm workers sustained the elegance. Grain still had to be harvested. Animals still had to be managed. Roofs still leaked. Children still cried in winter. Empire often hides labor beneath beauty. The rise of villas did not mean all Britain prospered equally. Many people continued to live in modest rural settlements, in timber buildings, in communities where Roman goods appeared selectively or scarcely. Some regions embraced provincial habits more deeply than others. Some remained stubbornly local. Roman Britain was not a smooth layer of Latin civilization. It was a patchwork of adoption, resistance, indifference, ambition, and need. Stratigraphic excavation reveals this patchwork with patient clarity. In one place, Roman pottery appears in abundance. In another, older styles persist. In one settlement, coins circulate widely. In another, exchange may remain based on barter, obligation, or local custom. Animal bones reveal diets, seeds reveal crops. Building remains reveal wealth or scarcity. Genomic data can suggest movement and mixture, while isotopic analysis can show where individuals grew up and what they ate. The province becomes not a flat map, but 1,000 biographies pressed into soil. Language changed in ways we can glimpse only partially. Latin ruled administration, law, army paperwork, official inscriptions, and elite display. But local languages did not vanish overnight. In fields, homes, and markets, speech must have been mixed and situational. A trader might bargain in one language, swear in another, pray with older words, and carve a Latin dedication because stone required the language of power. Law also entered daily life. Roman citizenship, contracts, inheritance customs, military diplomas, taxation records, and civic offices brought new frameworks of identity. For some, these opened doors. For others, they tightened obligations. A man granted citizenship gained status and legal privilege. A community recognized as a town entered new burdens as well as honors. The empire did not give without taking. And still, beneath everything, the old island breathed. At crossroads, shrines gathered offerings. In rural sanctuaries, people approached gods whose names are now lost. In households, ancestors may have remained near the hearth. The dead were buried under changing rites, sometimes with grave goods, sometimes without, sometimes in ways that look Roman, sometimes in ways that defy easy labels. No single ceremony can explain the province. Britain had become a place of borrowed gods and remembered gods, tiled roofs and roundhouse memories, law courts and sacred springs. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath bath floors, temple courtyards, villa mosaics, and market streets, where the conquered and the conquerors made a world neither one had fully imagined. At the northern edge of Roman Britain, where rain moved like a living thing across the hills and wind combed the grass until it lay flat and silver, the empire built a line of stone. Hadrian's Wall was not merely a barrier. It was a statement carved across the land. It stretched from river to sea, from the east where tidal waters opened toward the North Sea, to the west where the Solway tides breathed in and out across mudflats and salt marsh. It crossed ridges, dipped through valleys, climbed hard slopes, and stood beneath skies that could darken without warning. There, Rome did something astonishing. It tried to give an edge to power. The order came under Emperor Hadrian, a ruler who understood frontiers not only as military zones, but as symbols of imperial intelligence. The empire had expanded with hunger for centuries, swallowing kingdoms, cities, deserts, mountains, and coasts. But Hadrian's age carried a different wisdom, colder perhaps, more cautious. To rule everything was impossible. To rule what could be organized, defended, taxed, and understood was the harder art. So the wall rose. Imagine the labor: soldiers cutting stone from local quarries, men hauling blocks over uneven ground, lime burning in kilns, mortar mixed, foundations dug, surveyors measuring the line with technical precision, centurions shouting over wind and rain, hands split by cold, tunics soaked, boots sinking into mud. Every block represented muscle, discipline, command, and the belief that human will could impose form upon a wild horizon. But the wall was never just one wall. It was a system. Mile castles appeared at regular intervals, small fortified gateways where movement could be controlled. Turrets stood between them, watchful points along the line. Larger forts housed garrisons, cavalry, infantry, officers, workshops, granaries, headquarters buildings, and shrines. Ditches deepened the defensive landscape. Roads ran behind the wall, allowing soldiers and messages to move. The vallum, a great earthwork to the south in many stretches, marked another controlled zone, shaping access and separation. This was frontier as architecture. The wall did not say that nothing could pass. It said that nothing should pass unnoticed. People, animals, goods, messages, and rumors could be inspected, delayed, taxed, permitted, or refused. The frontier was not a deadline between civilization and barbarism. It was a place of encounter. Traders came, envoys came, soldiers crossed on patrol, local people worked, watched, negotiated, and adapted. The wall divided, but it also connected. It created a narrow world where empire and independence stared at one another across stone, ditch, and weather. To the north lay peoples Rome called by names that simplified their reality. Tribes, confederations, kin groups, farmers, herders, raiders, and leaders inhabited the lands beyond. They were not shadows waiting outside history. They had their own patterns of settlement, power, ritual, and memory. They knew the land intimately, the bogs, tracks, hidden crossings, seasonal pastures, and safe valleys. The Roman wall may have looked mighty, but those who lived beyond it understood that stone does not conquer rain, hunger, pride, or patience. To the soldiers stationed there, the frontier could be lonely. Many were not from Britain. Some came from distant provinces, from lands warmed by different suns and shaped by different gods. Auxiliary units brought men from across the empire, bound by military service and the hope of citizenship, pay, advancement, or survival. A soldier from the Danube, Spain, Gaul, or Syria might find himself beneath the cold northern sky, guarding a stone line through a landscape that seemed to breathe mist. Their lives were disciplined, but not empty. They drilled, patrolled, repaired walls, maintained roads, escorted supplies, wrote reports, stood guard, cleaned weapons, worshipped gods, gambled, complained, and waited. They watched smoke rise from settlements beyond the frontier. They listened for movement in darkness. They learned the faces of local traders and the moods of officers. They marked time by paydays, festivals, letters, inspections, sickness, and the turning seasons. Archaeology has given these soldiers an almost intimate voice. At Vindolanda, writing tablets preserved in remarkable conditions have revealed scraps of ordinary life with astonishing tenderness, invitations, supply requests, lists, complaints, personal notes, military reports, and fragments of daily administration speak from the damp earth. They remind us that empire was not only built by emperors, it was maintained by clerks, cooks, cavalrymen, wives, slaves, merchants, and messengers. A frontier survived through paperwork as much as courage. The tablets are fragile witnesses. Wood, ink, and chance carried them through centuries. Stratigraphic excavation placed them within layers of fort occupation. Environmental conditions preserved what should have vanished. Through them, the wall ceases to be silent stone and becomes a place of voices. Someone needed socks. Someone sent greetings. Someone counted grain. Someone worried about discipline. Someone invited a friend to a birthday celebration. Such small details are not distractions from history. They are history breathing. The forts along the wall formed communities. Outside, their gates grew civilian settlements, crowded and irregular, where traders, craftsmen, families, veterans, laborers, and others lived in the shadow of military pay. Taverns served soldiers. Smiths repaired equipment. Potters supplied vessels. Women ran households and businesses. Children grew up with the wall as their horizon. Dogs barked near workshops. Smoke drifted from cooking fires. the smell of dung, leather, beer, iron, wet wool, and wood smoke mingled with the sharper scent of military order. Religion flourished in this frontier world. Altars were raised to Jupiter, Mars, local gods, Eastern gods, protective spirits, and the divine power of the emperor. Soldiers carried belief with them, then reshaped it in new landscapes, at shrines near forts. Vows were made for safety, promotion, healing, and return. A man far from home could stand before an altar in the rain and ask a god to remember him. The wall itself changed over time. Sections were rebuilt, modified, abandoned, restored, and reoccupied according to military policy and political pressure. Frontier strategy was never fixed forever. Emperors dreamed, governors adjusted, commanders improvised. A line on a map suggests certainty, but the lived frontier was restless. Garrisons moved. Forts changed use. Supplies failed or arrived. Northern groups raided, traded, negotiated, and resisted. The wall endured because it was constantly maintained, and maintenance is one of the least glamorous forms of power. To walk the line in imagination is to feel both grandeur and fragility. Stone runs across high country, but clouds bury the summits. Fort gates open, but beyond them the land stretches free. Rome could mark the frontier, patrol it, tax it, and fortify it. Yet it could not make the world beyond disappear. The wall proclaimed control while confessing limitation. It was triumph and admission in the same structure. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know every soldier who shivered through a midnight watch. We do not know every local trader who crossed at a gate with animals or goods. We do not know every whispered exchange between garrison and countryside, every bribe, friendship, marriage, theft, prayer, insult, and warning. The frontier was made of these moments, countless and mostly unrecorded. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath collapsed ramparts, buried barracks, altar stones, ditch fills, and wind-swept fields, where Hadrian's wall still lies beneath the rain like the long stone thought of an empire learning where it ended. Beneath the eagle standards, beneath the polished myths of conquest, there lived ordinary soldiers with aching feet, empty stomachs, private fears, and names that once mattered to those who loved them. The Roman army in Britain was not a single people. It was a gathering of the empire itself. Legionaries, auxiliary infantry, cavalrymen, archers, engineers, clerks, doctors, armorers, builders, mule drivers, and scouts served in forts, towns, supply stations, ports, and frontier posts. Some were citizens, some were not. Some joined for pay, some for status, some because service offered a road out of poverty, some because the empire had made every other road narrower. To imagine them only in battle is to misunderstand their lives. Most days were not glorious. Most days were work. They marched, they dug, they drilled, they repaired, they carried timber, stone, grain, leather, tools, water, and weapons. They cleaned latrines, maintained ditches, groomed horses, copied reports, sharpened blades, and stood guard while rain entered every seam of clothing. Discipline was the skeleton of their world. The army took men from many provinces and remade them into instruments of command. A recruit entering service did not simply receive weapons. He received a new rhythm of existence. Orders shaped his waking. Trumpets divided time. Punishment waited behind disobedience. Rewards glittered beyond endurance. pay could be docked for equipment, food, clothing, and necessities. The soldier belonged to Rome, but Rome also owed him something: money, identity, comradeship, and perhaps, after long service, citizenship or land. In Britain, the legions occupied major bases that became worlds of their own. A legionary fortress was a city in military form. Streets crossed at right angles. Barracks housed groups of men who cooked, slept, argued, gambled, and remembered home together. Storehouses protected grain. Workshops rang with production and repair. The headquarters building contained sacred standards, official records, and the heart of command. Bathhouses steamed nearby, softening bodies hardened by labor and weather. The auxiliary troops lived another kind of story. Drawn from across the provinces, auxiliaries brought skills the Roman war machine needed: cavalry from regions famous for horses, archers from lands where the bow had deep traditions, scouts familiar with rough country, swimmers, slingers, and specialized fighters. They often served far from their origins, deliberately placed where local loyalties could not easily interfere with imperial obedience. In Britain, such men stood between Rome and the peoples it ruled. Yet many of them were themselves descendants of conquered worlds. A man from one frontier might guard another. There is a strange sadness in that thought. An auxiliary born beside a southern river might spend his youth beneath northern rain, watching a landscape whose language he barely knew. His gods traveled with him in memory, then found new homes on altars beside other gods. He might marry locally, officially or unofficially, raise children near a fort, and create a family that belonged neither wholly to his homeland nor wholly to Britain. Empire did not merely move armies. It rearranged human belonging. Around forts grew civilian settlements, full of life that military plans could never fully control. These communities gathered outside gates like barnacles on a ship. Traders offered food, drink, clothing, pottery, tools, and small luxuries. Blacksmiths repaired fittings. Leather workers made shoes and harness. Women managed households, businesses, taverns, and informal economies. Children played in streets where soldiers marched past with shields and spears. Veterans settled nearby, carrying old habits into new soil. The fort and its settlement depended on each other. Soldiers needed goods, affection, labor, entertainment, and services. Civilians needed the money soldiers spent. This was not a clean separation between army and society. It was a dense, breathing world of bargains, friendships, marriages, debts, quarrels, thefts, and rumors. A frontier town might smell of hot iron, spilled beer, animal dung, baking bread, wet wool, smoke, and the sour reek of crowded alleys after rain. Slavery existed within this world too, quiet and brutal. Enslaved people served households, officers, businesses, estates, and military communities. Some had been born into bondage. Others may have been taken through war, trade, debt, or piracy. Their names rarely survive. Their labor supported comfort, administration, food production, transport, and domestic life. Roman Britain was not only roads and baths, it was also ownership of human bodies, written into the ordinary economy of empire. Women appear in the record as shadows and sudden flashes of light. They were wives, partners, daughters, mothers, traders, workers, servants, enslaved people, priestesses, landholders, and patrons. Official military rules could restrict legal marriage for serving soldiers, yet life refused to obey paperwork completely. Families formed near forts, Children were born in the orbit of the army. Women sent messages, owned goods, made offerings, ran businesses, mourned the dead, and shaped the social life of military communities in ways the official record only partly admits. The army also created opportunities for movement. A soldier might arrive in Britain young and poor, then leave decades later with citizenship, savings, scars, and a new identity. A veteran could become a respected local figure, perhaps settling in a colony or near a fort. His service diploma, if preserved, would testify to a transformation from outsider to citizen, from recruit to man of recognized status. But for every success, there were many quieter endings: disease, accident, punishment, battle, exhaustion, and distance could swallow men without poetry. Medical care followed the army, practical and sometimes skilled. Forts could include hospitals where wounds were treated, bones set, infections managed, and fevers watched with anxious patience. Surgical instruments found by archaeologists remind us that Roman military medicine was not mere superstition. It was a disciplined craft, though limited by the knowledge of its age. A wounded man might lie beneath a rough blanket, hearing rain on the roof, smelling blood, vinegar, smoke, and fear, while a surgeon prepared iron tools by lamplight. Food held the army together as surely as discipline. Grain was ground, baked, boiled, and distributed. Meat, cheese, beans, beer, wine, oil, fish sauce, and local produce entered soldiers' diets according to supply, rank, and location. The empire carried Mediterranean tastes into northern landscapes, but adaptation was constant. A man stationed in Britain ate the province as much as he occupied it. Every loaf of bread represented fields, farmers, transport animals, storage systems, and administrative pressure. Weapons and armor were not abstract symbols. They were intimate objects. A helmet rubbed the skin. A shield grew heavy. A sword required cleaning. A boot could determine whether a march was endured or cursed. The soldier's body was shaped by equipment, weather, and repetition. Shoulders hardened beneath loads, feet blistered, teeth wore down from coarse food, joints suffered from cold and labor. The empire's power rested on flesh, yet even soldiers needed meaning. They worshipped in shrines, at altars, in headquarters buildings, in private corners, and beneath open sky. They made vows before campaigns, gave thanks for survival, prayed for promotion, honored unit gods, remembered homeland deities, and sometimes embraced cults carried across imperial roads. In this mingling of belief, the garrison became a spiritual marketplace. Jupiter could stand near local gods. A cavalryman could dedicate an altar to a goddess from his birthplace. A clerk could scratch a prayer into a surface no one expected to last. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know every soldier's nightmare. We do not know the songs sung after wine, the jokes told during road work, the insults muttered against officers, the tenderness of letters never preserved, or the grief of families who waited for men who never returned. Archaeology gives us boots, tablets, weapons, bones, dice, pots, inscriptions, and barrack floors. From these fragments, we feel the outline of lives once warm. The Roman army in Britain was a weapon, but it was also a society. It conquered, guarded, taxed, built, consumed, loved, worshipped, and died. Beneath the eagle, the empire wore human faces, countless and fading, answerless, adrift to ponder. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath fort streets, collapsed barracks, rubbish pits, graves, and rain-darkened ramparts, where the soldiers of Rome still sleep inside the long silence of the island. Britain was not held by Rome for beauty alone. Beneath the mist, beneath the green fields, beneath the rivers and wooded hills, the province offered wealth that could be counted, weighed, taxed, melted, shipped, stored, and consumed. Empire has a stomach. It feeds on grain, metal, labor, animals, timber, salt, cloth, coin, and obedience. Its monuments may shine in marble, its poets may praise destiny, its emperors may speak of peace and order, but far below the language of glory lies a quieter machinery. Men record payments, officials measure land, farmers surrender a portion of harvest, miners descend into darkness, ships leave harbor with cargo in their holds. The imperial world depends upon extraction. Britain became part of that vast appetite. The island's resources had drawn attention long before formal occupation. Traders knew of metals, livestock, hides, hunting dogs, slaves, grain, and other goods. Roman control intensified these interests and placed them within a larger system. What had once moved through exchange, alliance, and local power now entered the accounting habits of empire. Wealth did not merely exist. It had to be organized. Agriculture stood at the foundation. Across the more fertile regions, fields produced grain for towns, forts, villas, markets, and the army. Wheat and barley moved from countryside to storehouse, from storehouse to road, from road to garrison or port. A single fort required steady supply. A legionary base required far more. Men in armor do not grow their own bread while marching. Horses do not live on imperial pride. Every campaign, every watchtower, every governor's office depended on farmers whose names were almost never written down. In the countryside, the demands of Rome changed the rhythm of production. Some farms expanded. Some estates became more specialized. Villas in prosperous areas may have served as centers of agricultural management, where landlords controlled land, labor, storage, and distribution. Granaries rose with raised floors to keep grain dry. Barns and yards filled with animals, carts, tools, and workers. The countryside was no passive background to urban life. It was the place where empire became edible. Taxation made the connection unavoidable. A provincial subject could feel the empire not as an idea, but as an obligation at the door. Taxes might be paid in coin, in kind, through labor, or by supplying the army. The system varied across time and place, but the principle remained. Rome claimed a share. Officials, contractors, soldiers, and local elites all participated in the chain. Some profited, some endured, some were crushed. To the wealthy, Roman rule could open markets and consolidate power. A landowner who cooperated with officials might gain influence, legal advantage, and access to imported luxuries. He might dine from fine pottery, decorate rooms with painted plaster, commission mosaics, and send surplus produce along roads built by the same empire that protected his status. For such a person, Rome could look like opportunity. To a small farmer, the same system might look very different. A failed harvest did not cancel demand. Bad weather could spoil grain. Disease could strike animals, and still the obligation might remain. The sound of hooves on a track could mean customers, soldiers, officials, or trouble. A scale, a tally, a seal, a document. all could become instruments of anxiety. Empire entered the nervous system of daily life. Mining revealed the hunger of Rome with particular clarity. In the west and north, Britain possessed mineral wealth that attracted systematic exploitation: gold, silver, lead, iron, copper, and tin all mattered. Lead was especially important for pipes, coffins, weights, construction, and many ordinary uses of Roman life. Ingots stamped with official marks speak of production tied to state power and imperial administration. Metal could be dug from the earth, smelted, marked, transported, and absorbed into the wider body of the empire. At gold mining landscapes such as those in Wales, the work demanded engineering, water management, cutting, washing, and relentless labor. Channels could bring water to loosen earth and expose deposits. The landscape itself was wounded into productivity. What seems picturesque now may once have echoed with shouting. Water rush, tools striking stone, animals straining under loads, and human bodies bent beneath command. Mines were places of wealth, but not mercy. Labor underground or in open workings was dangerous, exhausting, and often brutal. Slaves, condemned workers, soldiers, specialists, and local laborers may all have played roles in different contexts. Darkness, dust, collapse, cold water, injury, and disease haunted the work. The glitter of metal in a treasury begins with hands in mud and lungs full of grit. Iron mattered too, not only for weapons, but for tools, nails, fittings, hinges, knives, plow parts, and the infrastructure of daily life. The Roman army devoured iron. Forts required nails. Roads required tools. Wagons required fittings. Farms required blades. Smiths worked constantly, transforming ore and scrap into the practical skeleton of empire. The ring of hammer on anvil was one of the province's true songs. Salt formed another quiet treasure. Without salt, food preservation becomes harder. Animals suffer, diets change, and armies grow more vulnerable. Salt working in coastal and inland areas tied communities into networks of production and exchange. It was not as glamorous as gold, but it was essential. The empire was built not only on precious metals, but on dull necessities. Ports turned resources into movement. Britain's coastline connected the province to Gaul, the Rhine, the North Sea, and the wider Roman economy. Ships carried grain, metal, pottery, wine, oil, fish sauce, soldiers, officials, letters, slaves, and rumor. Harbors and river mouths became thresholds where local production entered imperial circulation. The sight of cargo being loaded under gray skies must have been ordinary and profound at once. Bags, barrels, amphorae, crates, animals, chains, ropes, shouted orders, gulls screaming overhead, water slapping against hulls. The river systems mattered as much as roads. Rivers carried bulk goods more easily than carts across mud and hill. Settlements near navigable water gained importance because transport is power. A river could feed a town, supply a fort, carry taxes, and connect inland farms to distant markets. The empire did not simply conquer land. It learned how things moved through it. Coinage changed the texture of exchange. Coins paid soldiers, settled accounts, expressed imperial authority, and carried the emperor's image into countless hands. A person might never see the emperor in flesh, but his face could pass through a market, a tavern, a tax payment, a bribe, a savings hoard, or a burial offering. Coin made empire tactile. It placed distant authority between thumb and finger. Yet coin circulation was uneven. Some areas used coin heavily. Others remained less monetized. Barter, obligation, gift exchange, and local arrangements continued. Roman Britain was not a single economic machine working smoothly in all regions. It was a patchwork of markets, taxes, military demands, rural production, elite display, and stubborn local habits. Archaeology uncovers this economy through small things. Amphora fragments reveal imported goods. Animal bones show meat supply and butchery patterns. Seeds and pollen reveal crops and land use. Slag points to metalworking. Inscriptions on ingots speak of official control. Hoards reveal fear, savings, concealment, or ritual. Stratigraphic excavation can trace workshops, warehouses, kilns, granaries, and rubbish deposits. Scientific analysis can identify where pottery was made, where metals originated, and what people ate. The province becomes visible not only through monuments, but through waste. And waste is honest. A broken bowl thrown away, an animal bone split for marrow, a worn shoe discarded near a road, a failed casting in a workshop, a buried coin hoard never recovered by its owner. All these speak with a truth grand inscriptions often avoid. They reveal the empire as labor, consumption, loss, and repetition. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We cannot know every tax argument, every hunger season, every mine injury, every official bribe, every bargain at a port, every farmer who cursed the road because it brought collectors as easily as customers. We cannot know how many looked at Roman prosperity and saw theft wearing a clean tunic. We cannot know how many adapted gladly, counting profit where others counted grief. Britain fed Rome, armed Rome, paid Rome, and supplied Rome's northern ambitions, but the flow of wealth was never neutral. Extraction binds a province to empire while also deepening resentment. Every grain store, every mine, every road convoy, every stamped ingot carried a question beneath its usefulness: who truly owns the land, the labor, and the treasure beneath the earth? Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath ancient fields. Mine spoil, harbor mud, villa barns, and forgotten storehouses, where the gold, grain, and hunger of empire still lie pressed into the dark. In the north of Britain, Rome encountered a silence it could not easily command. The land rose into harder country, into uplands, glens, moors, forests, rivers, bogs, and mountains where mist could swallow distance and rain could turn a march into punishment. Here the roads grew more vulnerable, the supply lines longer, the weather less forgiving. Here, the empire that had crossed seas and chained kingdoms discovered that a landscape can be an enemy, and that freedom can hide in places where maps grow uncertain. Rome did not simply stop at the edge of the northern frontier because it lacked ambition. Roman commanders looked beyond it many times. They marched, scouted, built forts, negotiated, punished, and dreamed of final victory. Emperors and governors understood the political value of expansion. A conquered north could promise glory, security, and the satisfaction of unfinished business. Yet desire and possession are not the same. The peoples of the north were not waiting to be neatly defeated. They lived in communities shaped by terrain, kinship, cattle, local leaders, seasonal movement, and ancient patterns of survival. Their settlements did not always present Rome with obvious targets. Some lived in hill forts or defended sites. Others inhabited smaller farmsteads and enclosed communities, scattered across landscapes that resisted centralized conquest. The Roman army excelled at taking cities, breaking field armies, building roads, and enforcing tribute. But what happens when an enemy refuses to become convenient? The North answered with endurance. To Roman eyes, the people beyond the settled province could seem elusive, poor, fierce, and disorderly. Such judgments reveal the blindness of empire. A society without marble forums is not a society without intelligence. A people without Latin inscriptions are not a people without memory. The northern communities understood their own world, and in that understanding lay power. They knew where animals could graze, where tracks vanished, where rivers could be crossed, where strangers could be watched from high ground, where an army could be delayed until hunger and weather did their work. Rome could win battles. Holding the aftermath was harder. A marching column needed food, fodder, and predictable movement. Carts struggled on rough ground. Pack animals tired. Armor grew heavy in rain. Leather softened. Fires were difficult to keep. Grain supplies had to be protected. Scouts could be misled. Foraging exposed men to ambush. A fort built in remote country might command a road, but it also demanded constant feeding from far away. Every Roman mile northward created another obligation. Agricola, one of the most famous governors of Roman Britain, carried imperial arms deep into northern lands in the late 1st century AD. His campaigns, known largely through the literary portrait written by Tacitus, have become some of the most dramatic episodes in the Roman attempt to dominate the island. Forts were established. Fleets may have supported operations along the coast. Roman power pressed into territory that seemed close to final submission. The great battle remembered as Mons Gropius stands like a thundercloud in the written record. Tacitus describes a confrontation between Agricola's forces and a large northern army under a leader named Calgacus. The speeches placed in the mouths of commanders are literary creations, shaped by Roman moral imagination. Yet they contain one of the most haunting accusations ever aimed at empire, that Rome creates desolation and calls it peace. Whether the battle occurred exactly as described, and where it took place, remains debated. The ground has not yielded certainty. Scholars study possible sites, campaign routes, fort distributions, marching camps, and landscape logic, stratigraphic excavation, aerial survey, and analysis of Roman military installations help refine the picture. Yet the battlefield itself remains elusive, answerless, adrift to ponder. What matters is the pattern. Rome could thrust northward with force. It could win impressive victories. It could build temporary camps like geometric wounds across the land. But the north did not become a settled Roman heartland. The triumphs did not solidify into lasting possession. The empire advanced, then adjusted. It built, then withdrew. It declared victory, then reconsidered the cost. There is a kind of historical humility in this. Roman power was immense, but it was not infinite. The limits of empire were not always marked by stronger armies. Sometimes they were marked by rain, distance, poor returns, and people who would not gather into forms the conqueror could easily control. To rule a land, Rome needed more than courage. It needed administrative usefulness. It needed revenue to outweigh expense. It needed roads that could be held, elites who could be co-opted, settlements that could be taxed, fields that could feed garrisons, and enough stability to make occupation worthwhile. The far north offered resistance in many forms. Raiding could unsettle Roman territories without requiring open conquest. Alliances could shift. Groups could attack, retreat, negotiate, and return. A Roman commander might punish one community only to see another rise in a different valley. The empire liked clear categories: ally, enemy, subject, rebel. Frontier societies often lived in between those words, using ambiguity as survival. Forts north of the main frontier show how seriously Rome tried to manage the problem. Some were occupied, abandoned, reoccupied, or transformed across decades. Their ruins reveal the pulse of policy expansion, consolidation, retreat, renewed ambition. Aerial archaeology has revealed temporary camps marching across Scotland, the ghost lines of ditches and ramparts visible in crop marks and soil patterns. These camps are the footprints of armies that passed through with confidence, then vanished. They are among the most powerful traces of imperial impermanence. Inside such camps, soldiers slept briefly under leather tents or makeshift cover. They cooked, guarded, repaired equipment, and prepared for the next march. The earthworks were practical, not sentimental. Yet centuries later, their outlines remain, as if the land remembers the pressure of Roman discipline even where Roman rule failed to root. The northern landscape also challenged Roman imagination. In Mediterranean thought, the edges of the world often carried moral and symbolic weight. Remote peoples could be portrayed as noble, savage, terrifying, free, or barely human, depending on the writer's purpose. Britain's far north became one of those spaces where geography and ideology blurred. It was not only a place, it was the outer weather of empire, and for the soldiers stationed near that edge, the unconquered north was never abstract. It was the dark beyond patrol range, the smoke on a distant ridge, the hoofprints found in wet ground, the warning from a traitor, the sudden alarm at a fort gate, the prisoner who would not speak plainly, the body discovered near a road, the rumor of gathering warriors, the bitter knowledge that beyond stone and ditch, there remained people who did not bow. Rome tried more than one frontier strategy. At times, the frontier pushed farther north. At times, it settled back. The Antonine Wall, built across the narrower central belt of Scotland under Antoninus Pius, represented one of the empire's bold attempts to move its controlled boundary forward. Unlike the stone line farther south, it was primarily an earth and timber frontier, supported by forts and military roads. It was impressive, but brief in life compared with the older boundary. The occupation was difficult to sustain, and the line was eventually abandoned as Roman strategy returned southward. The abandonment was not failure in the simple sense. It was calculation. Empires often survive by choosing what not to hold. Yet such choices reveal truths that triumphal language conceals. The North had forced Rome to measure itself. What did conquest cost? What did it yield? How many men were needed? How much grain? How many horses? How many roads? How many dead? How much pride could be spent on mountains and mist? Material evidence gives the question weight. Roman camps far beyond the settled province, forts that flicker in and out of use, burned buildings, repaired gates, hordes hidden in anxious times, imported goods appearing beyond the frontier, suggesting trade, diplomacy, gift exchange, or plunder. The boundary was not a clean severing. Roman objects moved north. Northern people moved south. Violence and exchange lived side by side. Genomic data and isotopic analysis have complicated older images of static populations. People moved across frontiers through marriage, service, captivity, trade, and migration. The frontier was guarded, but never sealed. Human life is more porous than imperial policy. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know the names of most northern leaders who shaped resistance. We do not know the prayers spoken before raids, the councils held in smoky halls, the grief of households struck by Roman reprisals, or the calculations of chiefs deciding whether to fight, trade, or wait. Roman writers left us fragments, but the northern voice mostly lives in settlement remains, field systems, weapons, enclosures, and the stubborn geography of non-submission. There is dignity in that silence. The North refused to become merely a conquered chapter in someone else's history. It forced the greatest empire of the age to build walls, shift armies, rethink strategy, and accept uncertainty. It showed that power can dominate roads and towns while still failing to possess a horizon. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath heather, peat, pasture, and stone, where the unconquered North still keeps its counsel beneath the long rain. The weakening of Roman Britain did not begin with a single trumpet note of disaster. It began more quietly, in the slow loosening of confidence, in coins that changed their worth, in officials who served distant ambitions, in soldiers who followed rival emperors, and in coasts where sails appeared at the edge of bad weather. A province can seem strong while its foundations are already shifting. Britain had roads, walls, towns, forts, villas, mines, markets, temples, bathhouses, and laws. It had governors, tax systems, local councils, estate owners, soldiers, traders, craftsmen, priests, slaves, farmers, and magistrates. The visible world of Rome remained. Stone walls still caught the rain. Mosaic floors still shone in candlelight. Courtyards still smelled of damp plaster, cooking smoke, and wet wool. Official documents still moved through the hands of clerks, yet beneath these surfaces, pressure gathered. The Roman Empire of the 3rd century AD entered a long season of instability. Emperors rose and fell with frightening speed. Armies made rulers. Armies murdered rulers. Frontiers demanded men and money. Plague, inflation, invasion, civil war, and political fragmentation strained the imperial system. Britain, separated by sea, rich enough to matter, and guarded by troops with their own loyalties, became both a province and a temptation. When central authority weakens, the edges begin to think for themselves. In Britain, military commanders could become kingmakers, or emperors in all but name. The island's legions were not passive instruments. They were armed communities with interests, grievances, and expectations. If pay faltered, loyalty could falter. If a commander promised rewards, soldiers might listen. If Rome seemed distant, another Rome could be imagined closer at hand. The age of usurpers reveals this dangerous possibility. Men such as Carausius and Allectus turned Britain into the heart of an imperial breakaway in the late 3rd century. Carausius, associated with naval command, seized power and ruled Britain and parts of northern Gaul, issuing coins that presented him not as a bandit, but as a legitimate emperor. Coinage mattered deeply. A coin did not merely buy bread or pay soldiers. It proclaimed authority. It carried a face, a title, a claim to cosmic and political order. When Carausius placed his image into circulation, he told the province that sovereignty could be minted on British soil. This was a profound crack in the idea of empire. For ordinary people, the meaning may have been both dramatic and practical. Taxes still had to be paid. Soldiers still needed food. Markets still functioned. But the face on the coin had changed. The question of who ruled the world had entered the marketplace. Rome eventually restored direct control, but restoration is not the same as healing. The episode showed that Britain could be separated. It showed that the Channel was not only a road to conquest, but a shield behind which ambition could grow. It showed that provincial loyalty had to be maintained, not assumed. Reform followed crisis. The later Roman state became more heavily organized, more defensive, more demanding. Military and civil authority were adjusted. Fortifications were strengthened in many places. Coastal defenses grew in importance. Administration became more complex. The empire learned to survive by becoming harder, more watchful, and more burdensome. Along the eastern and southern coasts of Britain, a chain of fortified sites is often associated with the defense against seaborne threats. These strongholds faced the gray waters from which raiders might come. Their massive walls, projecting towers, and strategic positions speak of anxiety hardened into architecture. The sea, once the path of Roman arrival, had become a zone of danger. Imagine those coasts in the late Roman centuries. A watchman stands above a tidal shore as wind drives rain into his face. Beyond him, the water shifts in dull metal colors. Gulls wheel and cry. Somewhere beyond the horizon move ships whose intentions are unknown. Traders and raiders can look alike at first. A sail is a question before it becomes an answer. Villagers near the coast learn to read rumor, smoke, and silence. Officials send messages inland. Garrisons prepare, wait, complain, and wait again. Threats came from multiple directions. Groups identified in Roman sources as Saxons, Franks, Picts, Scots, and others placed pressure on Britain and its surrounding seas. These names conceal complex realities. They were not simple nations in the modern sense, but shifting peoples, raiding bands, confederations, migrants, warriors, and communities whose relationships with Rome included trade, service, violence, diplomacy, and settlement. The late Roman frontier was not a wall against one enemy. It was a trembling system facing many forms of movement. Raiding was especially corrosive because it attacked confidence. A single raid could burn a villa, seize livestock, carry off captives, and vanish. Another could strike a coast or river settlement. Forts could not protect every farm. Roads could move troops, but only after news arrived. The psychological effect was immense. People began to hide wealth. Hoards of coins buried in the ground may speak of fear, savings, ritual, or crisis. And every hoard never recovered carries the shadow of someone who expected to return and did not. The economy changed under such pressure. Coin supply fluctuated. Urban life altered. Some towns contracted, fortified smaller areas, or saw public buildings fall into neglect. The maintenance of baths, basilicas, forums, and large civic structures required wealth, labor, authority, and confidence. When these weakened, roofs failed, drains clogged, walls were robbed for stone, and grand spaces were repurposed for humbler needs. The city did not always die suddenly. It changed use, shrank, adapted, and forgot parts of itself. In the countryside, villas tell another troubled story. Some continued in wealth and comfort into the later Roman period, their owners decorating floors with elaborate mosaics and sustaining elite lifestyles. Others declined, were abandoned, subdivided, or transformed. The villa world depended on agricultural surplus, estate management, security, markets, and elite identity tied to Roman forms of display. When those conditions shifted, painted walls and heated rooms became harder to maintain. Luxury is fragile when the system that feeds it begins to strain. Yet decline was not uniform. This is crucial. Roman Britain did not simply collapse everywhere at once. Some regions remained prosperous longer. Some communities adapted with resilience. Some local elites retained influence. Some military zones remained active. Some towns continued to function, though differently. The province was a living landscape, not a broken statue. Its weakening must be read as uneven, local, and layered. Archaeology resists simple drama. Stratigraphic excavation shows continuity in one place, disruption in another. Pottery sequences thin at different rates. Coin loss patterns shift. Buildings are repaired, then neglected, then reused. Burials change. Fort walls are strengthened while nearby civilian life contracts. Scientific analysis of animal bones, seeds, and soils reveals changes in diet, farming, and land use that do not always match the grand political narrative. The earth speaks in gradients, not slogans. Still, the cracks widened. The late Roman state demanded more from its subjects because it needed more to survive. Tax burdens could grow heavier. Local councils struggled to meet obligations. The army required pay and supply. Officials enforced collection. Wealthy people sought exemptions or protection. Poorer people bore pressure with fewer defenses. The imperial system that once promised order increasingly felt like a weight. Christianity added another transformation, subtle at first, then more visible. In parts of late Roman Britain, Christian symbols, churches, burial customs, and inscriptions suggest the spread of a faith that connected the province to wider changes across the empire. But older religious practices did not vanish neatly. Pagan temples, local cults, household rituals, and new Christian identities overlapped in complicated ways. Spiritual life changed as political life trembled. People prayed for salvation, healing, justice, protection, and meaning in a world whose official certainties were becoming less certain. The army itself changed. Units were reorganized. Some troops were more mobile. Others defended fixed positions. Recruitment patterns shifted. Soldiers might be locally rooted, tied to families and communities near their posts, less like distant conquerors and more like armed inhabitants of Britain. This could strengthen local defense, but weaken the idea that troops belonged first to an emperor far away. When pay, command, and legitimacy faltered, military loyalty could become personal, regional, or desperate. The empire remained powerful, but its power felt increasingly conditional. A message from the continent could arrive late or not at all. A new emperor might be proclaimed, then killed. A commander might demand allegiance. A tax collector might insist that the system still worked while everyone knew it was fraying. The forms endured longer than the confidence behind them. That is how worlds weaken, not always through flames visible from far away, but through habits losing force, through repairs postponed, through coins debased or absent, through public buildings neglected, through farmers hiding grain, through roads less safely traveled, through coastal watchers scanning a hostile sea, through elites wondering where loyalty should now be placed, through ordinary people sensing that the great machine still moves, but with a grinding sound beneath the surface. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know every village that feared raiders, every official who falsified accounts, every soldier who followed a usurper, every landowner who buried silver beneath a floor, every family that abandoned a house because protection had become uncertain. We do not know the private moment when someone first understood that Rome, immense Rome, might not be forever. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath late Roman walls, coastal forts, coin hoards, ruined villas, narrowed streets, and fields where the machinery of empire began to lose its rhythm under the British reign. By the early 5th century, a D, The imperial voice in Britain had grown faint. It did not vanish in one clean instant, like a candle pinched between fingers. It faded through uncertainty, through hurried orders, through men marching away, through coins no longer arriving in familiar quantities, through officials whose authority became harder to enforce, through towns that waited for help from across the sea and heard only wind. The year AD 410 stands in memory like a door closing. In that year, the Emperor Honorius, ruling amid crisis, is associated with a message telling the cities of Britain to look to their own defense. Whether the exact meaning of that communication has been debated, its symbolic force remains immense. Britain, once invaded, measured, taxed, fortified, and folded into the imperial world, now faced the terrifying possibility that Rome could no longer protect what it had claimed. The legions had not all vanished overnight in some single solemn parade. The military story was more tangled. Troops had been drawn away during earlier struggles. Commanders had pursued imperial ambitions on the continent. Usurpers had taken soldiers from Britain in bids for power. Frontier defense had been strained by attacks and by the weakening of central control. The army that remained was not the same vast instrument that had once carved roads through forests and raised stone across northern hills. The province was left with fragments of power. Some local leaders still possessed wealth. Some towns still had councils or remnants of civic organization. Some military commanders may have remained with local forces. Some communities could repair walls, muster men, guard storehouses, and negotiate with neighbors. But the great imperial system that had connected Britain to emperor, treasury, bureaucracy, and continental armies was breaking apart. What does abandonment feel like? Not as a historian's sentence, but as lived reality. Perhaps it feels like a road with fewer official riders, a fort gate with fewer guards, a market where older coins are counted more carefully, a villa owner wondering whether taxes still go outward or whether grain must be kept for private defense, a town council arguing in a cold hall while the roof leaks and no one knows whose command truly matters, a coastal community watching the horizon, knowing that no fleet may come. The end of Roman Britain was not simply an event. It was a change in expectation. For generations, people had lived within a world where Roman authority, however burdensome, gave structure to ambition and fear. Laws, titles, offices, taxes, military ranks, coinage, roads, courts, and public buildings told people how power should look. Even resistance had defined itself against Rome. When that structure weakened, the question was not only who rules now. The deeper question was what kind of world remains when the old language of rule no longer works. Cities began to change in ways that archaeology can trace with patient sadness. Large public buildings were no longer maintained as they once had been. Forums and basilicas lost their civic centrality. Some spaces were reused for craft activity, shelter, storage, or habitation of humbler kinds. Streets accumulated debris. Drainage systems failed. Monumental stone was robbed for other buildings. The careful face of urban Roman life softened, cracked, and became practical in new ways. This was not always sudden ruin. It was transformation through necessity. A basilica could become a quarry. A bathhouse could fall cold when fuel, labor, and civic funding disappeared. A townhouse could be subdivided. A market area could shrink. Defensive walls might become more important than public elegance. People did not stop living because Rome weakened. They adapted. They moved through familiar streets with altered meanings. They made smaller worlds inside the shells of larger ones. Coinage tells a particularly haunting story. Roman coins had once carried the emperor's image into hands across the province. They paid soldiers, settled taxes, marked exchange, stored wealth, and symbolized participation in a wider imperial order. In the early 5th century, regular coin supply to Britain dwindled and then effectively ceased. This does not mean every transaction stopped. People could still barter, reuse older coins, weigh metal, exchange goods, rely on obligation, or develop local arrangements. But the disappearance of fresh imperial coinage was more than economic inconvenience. It was a silence in metal. The emperor's face stopped arriving. In the countryside, life also shifted. Some villas were abandoned or changed function. Mosaic floors cracked beneath neglect. Painted plaster fell. Hypocaust heating systems, once signs of elite comfort, became useless if no one could maintain them. Fields still had to be worked. Animals still had to be kept. Bread still had to be baked. But the social world that made villa luxury meaningful was fading. Estate owners may have tried to preserve authority by becoming local strongmen. Some families perhaps retreated to defensible sites. Others blended into new rural patterns. The distinction between Roman landowner, British aristocrat, military leader, and early post-Roman ruler becomes difficult to separate. Titles vanish from the record. Power becomes local, personal, negotiated, and fragile. The forts, too, entered uncertain lives. Some may have continued as defensive centers. Some were occupied by communities no longer organized in the old military manner. Barracks could become domestic spaces. Storehouses could be reused. Fort walls could shelter people whose relationship to Rome had become memory rather than command. The architecture remained, but the meaning changed. A place built for imperial discipline could become a refuge for local survival. Raids and migrations added further pressure. The peoples named in surviving sources as Saxons, Angles, Picts, Scots, and others were part of a moving, violent, opportunistic, and complicated world. Some came as raiders. Some may have been invited as mercenaries. Some settled. Some fought. Some traded. The old Roman categories of enemy and ally blurred in the confusion. Britain did not fall into emptiness. It entered a contested age where power could be claimed by those with ships, war bands, kin networks, and land hunger. For the people living through it, the future did not yet have the names later historians would give it. They did not know they stood at the edge of Roman Britain. They knew only danger, memory, hunger, faith, ambition, and loss. Christian communities may have endured in places, carrying new forms of identity through the fading imperial order. Bishops, priests, monks, patrons, and believers could preserve networks of literacy, ritual, and moral authority. Yet the shape of religion in this period remains difficult to see clearly. Older practices did not disappear cleanly. Sacred landscapes persisted. The dead were buried with changing rites. Prayers continued, but the world around them had altered. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The written record becomes thin, frustrating, and shadowed. Archaeology must carry much of the burden. Stratigraphic excavation reveals reuse, abandonment, burning, repair, and decay. Pottery sequences change. Imported goods diminish. Metalwork styles shift. Burial practices become vital clues. Radiocarbon dating helps frame sites in a period where coins no longer provide easy dates. Genomic data and isotopic analysis open new questions about movement, ancestry, diet, and migration. Though they do not turn uncertainty into simplicity, The end of Roman Britain was not the end of life. It was the end of a system that had once seemed permanent. Roads remained, but their maintenance changed. Walls remained, but their commands faded. Latin may have lingered in religion, administration, memory, and elite culture, but spoken life moved in many directions. Local rulers emerged from the ruins of imperial order. Communities defended themselves as best they could. The island entered an age of smaller powers, harder boundaries, and stories that would later become legend. There is sorrow in this, but also continuity. A mother still warmed food over a fire. A farmer still judged the sky before sowing. A smith still worked metal. A child still ran beside old stones without knowing whose hands had placed them there. People made do with the remains of greatness, as humans always do. They lived among ruins before the ruins were ancient. And somewhere in Britain, perhaps in a town whose public buildings were already crumbling, perhaps near a fort where soldiers had become settlers, perhaps in a villa whose mosaic floor was patched with rough boards. Someone must have understood that the world of Rome had passed beyond reach, not ended in thunder, not erased by one battle, but withdrawn, thinned, and finally absent. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath early graves, abandoned town streets, reused forts, silent villas, and fields where the last imperial coins lay cold in the earth, waiting for hands that never returned. Under English reign, Rome did not disappear. It sank into the ground, entered the stones, shaped the roads, haunted the walls, and became a memory so deep that later ages walked upon it without always knowing what lay beneath their feet. The empire that had once measured Britain with surveyors, taxed it with officials, guarded it with soldiers, and renamed its places in Latin did not leave behind only ruins. It left behind habits of landscape, fragments of law, echoes of speech, altered towns, sacred memories, and the long question of what civilization costs. The roads are among the most enduring witnesses. Some Roman roads still run like old thoughts across the country, straight in places where later paths bend around them, buried beneath lanes, fields, hedges, and modern traffic. They were built for military speed and administrative reach, yet they outlived the commanders who ordered them. A road is a practical thing, but it is also a philosophy. It says that distance can be conquered. It says that the earth can be disciplined. It says that power moves best when the world has been prepared for its arrival. To walk such a line in imagination is to see many Britons layered together. The legionary column with iron-shod sandals, the merchant cart with pottery and salt, the messenger carrying orders, the medieval pilgrim, the drover, the farmer, the modern traveler passing over buried gravel without hearing the old rhythm below. Time does not erase the road. It changes the feet that use it. The walls remain too. Hadrian's Wall, broken yet mighty, still crosses the northern country like a scar that has become a monument. Its stones no longer control imperial movement. Its gates no longer tax traders beneath the gaze of Roman officers. Its towers no longer watch for smoke rising from hostile hills. Yet it continues to command attention, not because it works as Rome intended, but because it reveals Rome's imagination of itself. A wall is confidence and fear made visible. It is the shape of power admitting that beyond this line, certainty fails. Visitors now stand where soldiers once stood, feeling wind instead of orders, looking north across country that refused full possession. Sheep graze where patrols moved. Grass covers the footings of barracks. Museum cases hold sandals, tablets, altars, weapons, and fragments of everyday life. The frontier has become peaceful in appearance, but not silent. It speaks in cold air, in stone courses, in the loneliness of distances that empire never fully solved. Cities carry deeper ghosts. London, York, Lincoln, Bath, St. Albans, Colchester, and other places grew upon Roman bones or near Roman memories. Street plans, walls, buried floors, drains, cemeteries, inscriptions, temples, workshops, and fortresses lie beneath later centuries. Modern buildings rise above ancient foundations. Trains pass near places where traders once unloaded goods. Offices stand over burned layers. Churches look across ground where pagan shrines, markets, and military structures may once have stood. Archaeology restores these buried worlds with patience. Stratigraphic excavation separates collapse from construction, burning from rebuilding, abandonment from reuse. Radiocarbon dating refines the age of organic traces. Ceramic analysis follows trade and changing taste. Genomic data and isotopic analysis give glimpses of movement, ancestry, diet, and migration. Environmental evidence reveals fields, animals, pollution, woodland clearance, and human pressure on land. The province is no longer just a story written by Roman authors. It is a laboratory of memory. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The greatest legacy of Roman Britain may not be a road, a wall, a bath, or a coin. It may be the complexity it forces us to accept. For generations, people have argued over whether Rome brought civilization or oppression, order or exploitation, culture or violence. The answer is not clean because the past was not clean. Rome built towns, but also took land. Rome brought new forms of law, but also slavery. Rome created markets, but also extracted wealth. Rome introduced monumental architecture, but also demanded submission. Rome connected Britain to a wider world, but did so through conquest. To see only glory is blindness. To see only brutality is another blindness. The truth lies in the uncomfortable middle, where human beings lived with choices shaped by forces larger than themselves. Some Britons profited, some suffered, some resisted, some adapted, some forgot old ways, some preserved them quietly. Some became Roman in public and something older by the hearth. Some never accepted the empire except as weather, dangerous and unavoidable. The Roman presence changed religion, but did not make the sacred simple. Local gods were renamed, paired, translated, or hidden behind Latin forms. Springs continued to receive prayers. Altars carried dedications from soldiers far from home. Christianity grew in the late imperial world and survived in uncertain forms as political structures weakened. Beneath every official cult lived private fear illness, childbirth, theft, death, harvest failure, and the hope that unseen powers were listening. The Roman presence changed identity too. A person in Britain might be a citizen of Rome, a speaker of local language, a veteran's child, a trader's wife, a villa owner, a farm laborer, a Christian, a worshipper of older gods, a slave, a freed person, a soldier from another province, or a descendant of many worlds. The province was never a single identity stamped from above. It was a place where identities overlapped like wet leaves on stone. When imperial rule faded, these layers did not vanish instantly. They were carried into new centuries in broken, altered, and surprising ways. Stone from Roman buildings entered later walls. Roman roads guided later travel. Forts became refuges, settlements, quarries, or legends. Latin endured in church and learning. Memories of order, grandeur, and lost authority may have shaped the dreams of later rulers. Even the absence of Rome became powerful. A vanished empire can rule imagination long after its officials have gone. There is a quiet warning here. Empires often believe themselves permanent because their buildings are hard, their armies disciplined, their laws written, their coins abundant, and their ceremonies convincing. But permanence is an illusion made persuasive by scale. Rome in Britain lasted for centuries, long enough for children to be born, grow old, and die without knowing any other political world. Yet it ended. Its roads outlived its tax collectors. Its walls outlived its orders. Its baths outlived the civic life that heated them. Its coins lay buried in soil, still bearing faces of emperors whose commands had become dust. And Britain endured, not unchanged, not untouched, not pure, but alive. The island absorbed the empire, suffered it, used it, resisted it, remembered it, and buried it. Beneath the rain, the Roman world became part of Britain's deep time, one layer among many prehistoric fields, Iron Age hill forts, Roman towns, early medieval graves, Norman castles, industrial cities, and modern roads humming over ancient ground. To contemplate Roman Britain is to contemplate ourselves. We too live among systems that appear immovable. We too trust roads, currencies, offices, laws, armies, markets, and stories of order. We too inherit landscapes shaped by people whose names we will never know. We too mistake the present arrangement for destiny. But the earth teaches otherwise. Every excavation trench is a cut through certainty. Every buried wall says that someone once believed this would last. Every broken pot says that daily life mattered as much as imperial policy. Every skeleton says that history was lived inside bodies. Every coin hoard says that fear has weight. Every road says that ambition leaves a line. Every ruin says that time is the final emperor. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath gardens, car parks, fields, riversides, and churchyards, where Roman Britain still waits in darkness, patient, dignified, and unfinished. And so the empire that ruled the world remains in Britain not as a living power, but as a question laid beneath the rain. What do we build? What do we take? What do we remember? And what will remain when our own age has passed into silence?